Okay, thank you, Sue, and thank you everyone for taking some time out of your evening to participate in this meeting today. And also, I just want to say thanks for everyone who's been following this project and providing input throughout the process. We're really appreciative of all the participation that you've been able to provide over the last 2 years as we've gone through this study. So as Sue said, my name is Melanie Pham, and I'm the project lead working on the Waterdown Community Node Secondary Plan Study. So this evening in my presentation, I'm going to provide a short background on the study, explain where we're at in the process, and then I'll be giving an overview of what we heard in the last consultations, and then talking about some key features of the draft secondary plan. So as a review for those who may not be familiar with the study, the objective of the study is to create a secondary plan for the core area in Waterdown. So that's referred to as a community node in the city's official plan, that area. A secondary plan is a land use plan, and it's focused on a smaller geographic area of the city. And what they're typically based on a vision of what a community should look like, and they provide some direction about how a community should change and grow over time. So in this area, the secondary plan that we're looking at is intended to support the continued vibrancy of this community and of the community node. We're looking at ensuring that new buildings have high quality design, maintaining a good transportation network that improves options for walking, cycling, and transit. And we're trying to conserve the area's heritage, which is a key part of the community's unique character. So the study is comprised of 3 main parts. So there's the development of the land use plan, the development of a set of urban design guidelines to support the land use plan, and then there's also a cultural heritage review. And the timing of 2 other studies, which overlap with the secondary plan study area, has also been aligned with this study so that each study can inform and support the other. So these are the Waterdown Community Transportation Management Plan and the Waterdown Village Built Heritage Inventory. So the Transportation Management Plan is reviewing and providing direction for the transportation network in the broader community of Waterdown. And the Built Heritage Inventory is looking at individual buildings in the historic village area and making recommendations for properties that should be added to the city's municipal heritage register or designated. So we've divided up the progress of the study into various phases as outlined here. We're now in the 3rd phase of the project, where we've prepared the draft secondary plan and the urban design guidelines, and we're looking for input. And we're also looking for input on the recommendations of the cultural heritage review. And once we've completed all the consultations this month, we'll be working on preparing a final plan for the city's planning committee to consider, along with a staff report for the project, and that's expected in the fall. So the last consultations on this project took place back in October last year, where we had a virtual information meeting, and we also collected some comments through a survey and by email. And in those consultations, we reviewed the draft vision and principles for the plan. We talked about the boundary of the node area and different land use options for the node area. So there were some options for heights, some options for pedestrian focus areas, which are areas where we can apply a set of policies to create a pedestrian focus with a retail Main Street type of commercial atmosphere. And we also showed some draft land use designations. So all of that, if you're interested in looking at it, is in a feedback report, which is on the project website. And today I'm going to talk about some of that feedback we received and how we've tried to incorporate it into the secondary plan. So the vision and principles and the objectives that were outlined were generally supported. We heard a lot of positive feedback on these. We did get a few comments which resulted in some minor changes and the addition of an objective about supporting affordable housing. So the updated vision has basically reordered the sentences in the second part of the vision, and we've added a reference to the village character of the community as well. So in our options that we showed for heights in the node, the majority of comments preferred restricting heights to 3 stories within the historic commercial core, which is east of Hamilton Street. And most comments indicated that mid-rise building heights would be acceptable in areas like Hamilton Street, provided they have high quality design. So in the proposed secondary plan, we've included a special policy area that would limit height to 3 stories on that portion of the node with east of Hamilton Street. And other mixed-use areas would maintain a maximum height of 6 stories. On the west side of Hamilton Street, there would be a potential for up to 8 stories through additional applications where certain design requirements are met. And the secondary plan also limits the maximum height to 3 stories on all lands in the node, which have a medium density residential designation. So these are highlighted in red here. The preferred option for pedestrian focus streets was to identify the historic core, to continue identifying it as pedestrian focus, and to add additional areas. But there were some mixed opinions on the extent of the area where these pedestrian focus street policies should apply. So there was some opinions about extending it to a portion of Hamilton Street North. Some felt that additional areas or the whole node should be included. Overall, what we were hearing was a good quality streetscape with trees and a high level of walkability was important for the node area. And we also heard that there's a need to connect Hamilton Street and Dundas Street through a more consistent streetscape so they don't feel like 2 different places. What we've proposed in the draft plan is that the pedestrian focus street policies be applied to the historic core and a portion of Hamilton Street up to White Oak Drive and a small portion of Dundas Street by the intersection of Hamilton and Dundas Streets. So we are providing direction for all new development in the core to be pedestrian supportive and to have a high quality streetscape. We're also looking at addressing this through the design guidelines, but it's only in this focused area that we're looking to have certain policies such as mandatory commercial uses on the ground floor and a 2-story minimum height to try and continue that historic village character through to Hamilton Street. So we did hear some things in general about heritage conservation in our consultations, including some concerns about redevelopment pressures and making sure that new development is compatible with heritage. So we have drafted a number of policies in the secondary plan about compatible development and about heritage protection. We're identifying specific heritage attributes within cultural heritage landscapes that are in the plan that should be protected. And the policies also direct the zoning bylaw to have put standards in place to ensure new development in residential areas have sizes, heights, and setbacks that are consistent with surrounding housing. So the urban design guidelines also provide some direction for ensuring that new development is compatible with heritage as well. On the subject of design, we heard comments about the importance of good design for the area and a lot of support for the urban design guidelines. We also heard a desire to make sure that the guidelines stick. So to help with this, we've put some key directions for urban design into the policies of the secondary plan. And also in the policies have stated that new development must be consistent with the design guidelines. And in addition to this, we're looking at putting a few built form standards into zoning, for example, requiring upper stories of buildings above that 2 to 3 story height to be stepped back from the street. So in addition, we did hear some thoughts about transportation in our consultations as well. We know that traffic issues remain a challenge for the node. The policies in the secondary plan are providing direction for network improvements that are being proposed through the transportation management plan. So these things include new cycling infrastructure, new multi-use paths, new pedestrian crossings to be planned in the node and across Grindstone Creek, and also looking at transit service improvements, including a potential future transit stop in the node, a hub where multiple lines could connect. Policies about parking look at maximizing on-street parking in the historic core and potentially looking at creating municipal parking in the future for the area. So the draft secondary plan has a number of different policy sections as shown on this slide. The secondary plan will become a part of the city's Urban Hamilton official plan once it's approved. So it's important to note that the policies of the official plan will still apply in addition to the secondary plan policies, which provide some more detailed direction for the area. So there's 4 maps that are proposed to be included in the secondary plan. And I just wanted to go through them briefly today to give you an idea of what they look like. So here's the draft land use map for the secondary plan. It's very similar to the map shown in the last meeting we had. We have a number of different residential designations in the plan. We have the mixed use medium areas, which are essentially the commercial areas in pink, and the hatching showing the pedestrian focus areas. And there's a few other designations as well for parks and open space and institutional and utility. And in addition to these, you will notice there are some areas identified with red dotted lines and letters. And these are special policy areas that deal with either certain directions in the plan, such as the 3-story height limit in the historic core, or recognizing existing permissions on certain properties that we're maintaining. So the second map in the plan is a map that is showing various transportation features, and this is based on information coming out of the transportation management plan. We have existing and proposed connections shown on this map and some existing and proposed cycling infrastructure. A potential transit hub location is noted on the map by the green star. This is also a potential connecting location for interregional bus route that Metrolinx is planning on Dundas Street. So there's also 3 new pedestrian road crossings that we discuss in the policy document. They're not on this map because we don't know the exact locations at this point, but these are the general road segments where we'd be looking at doing this. So timing and feasibility of new crossings would be assessed as new development is proposed, and we would try to integrate planning for those crossings with the design of new development. And after the transportation map, we have a map that shows all of the cultural heritage resources within the plan, including 6 cultural heritage landscapes, as well as the existing heritage district, and properties that are designated under the Heritage Act or listed on the Heritage Register. And I just want to note that the properties that are shown as listed on this map are still draft recommendations. They're from the Waterdown Village Built Heritage Inventory. So they are not currently listed, but we've shown them on the map to give an indication of what the final map will likely look like. And the last map in the plan is an information map showing the detailed boundaries of the natural heritage features and hazards in the plan. Going forward, there's a few items we'll have to look at for implementation of the directions coming out of the study. To enact the secondary plan, an official plan amendment will be needed to add the secondary plan to the city's Urban Hamilton official plan. We're also looking at what zoning updates would be needed to align with the directions of the secondary plan and the guidelines. And we've also done a high-level servicing review of the area based on the city's current servicing master plans, which are planning to 2031. However, there are updates being done to 2051, so some further planning for servicing will need to be done within those citywide updates to ensure that any infrastructure improvements needed for this area are identified. So that would be done after the plan is endorsed. And lastly, I'm going to leave this mostly to our consultant for the Cultural Heritage Review to speak about. One of the conservation tools we're looking at is for heritage is the creation of a heritage conservation district for a targeted area or areas within the study. And that would require the completion of a heritage conservation district study, which would not be part of the secondary plan, but it would be a study completed after. So that may be included as a recommendation to council in our staff report. So in looking at next steps, feedback on the materials presented today will be collected until the end of June, and detailed documents are located on the project's webpage. We encourage you over the next few weeks to submit feedback through the city's webpage or by email if you'd like to do that. And feedback will be gathered into a feedback report, and we'll be assessing it to see what types of changes to the secondary plan, the guidelines, or the cultural heritage review may be needed before we bring a final plan to the city's planning committee for consideration. So I just want to thank everyone for listening at this point, and I'm going to pass things back to Sue for the next presentation. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Melanie, very much. And we're now going to go to Brooke McElroy, to Nathan and Tanisha, who are going to present the urban design guidelines. And you may note we have some questions already in the question box about some urban design. So I'm sure that your presentation will resonate well in terms of the information. So Nathan, I'm not sure if you or Tanisha are sharing, but we welcome you.
Yes, I've just got the share button appear here, and I think Tanisha is going to kick us off.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nathan. Good evening, and thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Tanisha Pahazino-Chente, and I'm a planner and associate at Brooke McElroy. I'm joined by my colleague Nathan Flack, a senior associate and urban designer architect, and our team has been retained by the City of Hamilton to produce the urban design guidelines for Waterdown. The Waterdown Community Node Urban Design Guidelines promote high-quality urban design for buildings, sites, and the public realm. As Melanie noted, they will be used by city staff to review and evaluate development proposals in Waterdown, and key guidelines from the document will be translated into secondary plan policies. The Urban Design Guidelines internally has three phases to our project, and we're currently in phase 3 working on finalizing the draft guidelines, which after receiving your feedback would then be incorporated into the broader secondary plan process. The guidelines focus primarily on the part of the study area identified as the community node, which is identified in blue on the screen, which is a smaller subset of the secondary plan study area. And the community node is centered around Hamilton and Dundas streets. To date, we've undergone extensive consultation with the community, which has informed the draft urban design guidelines in their current form. Related to design character, we've heard the following: that new buildings should incorporate sustainability, public art, and reflect heritage character of the community, revitalize the area with new buildings and open spaces, and consider the adaptive reuse of existing buildings. Related to building heights and massing, we've heard a desire to use stepbacks to effectively reduce perceived height, mass, and bulk of buildings, and that building design should mitigate shadowing and preserve sky views. Related to mobility, we've heard a desire to improve walkability throughout Waterdown with enhanced pedestrian safety and comfort, and to separate bike lanes from walking paths from vehicular traffic. For landscaping in the public realm, we've heard the desire to consider opportunities for new public spaces and enhancement of existing spaces, to enhance the quality of the public realm through new trees and landscaping, seating, lighting, and weather protection elements, and to improve street level animation through retail uses at grade and new buildings located along the street frontage. Development within the Waterdown community node should be guided by the following urban design principles: create a connected Waterdown, create animated streetscapes, create more compact and efficient development through strategic intensification in key locations, protect neighborhoods, conserve and enhance natural and cultural heritage, and overall promote high-quality site and building design. The vision for the Waterdown community node is premised on the establishment of two character areas, which you can see in yellow and blue on your screen. The Hamilton Dundas character area in yellow and the historic commercial character area in blue. The future form of these areas will reinforce the pedestrian-friendly nature of the historic village core and promote a compact urban development pattern within the community node, focusing density within the Hamilton Dundas character area and ensuring consistency in streetscape design between the two areas. The decision for the two character areas was informed by existing character of each and the development potential, as well as extensive consultation feedback. Next, please. The first area, the Hamilton Dundas character area, is centered around Hamilton Street from Parkside Drive and along Dundas Street, west to Golden View Court. The proposed character of this area should maintain larger lots to allow for comprehensive mixed-use development, ensure that built form defines the street edge, and overall support multimodal street design. Key directions for this area. The Hamilton Dundas character area, as I mentioned, will be the focus area for intensification within the community node. Large lots will accommodate a gradient of heights and densities in mixed-use developments. As Melanie noted, a maximum of 6 stories is permitted generally, and in certain circumstances, up to 8 stories on the west side of Hamilton Street through additional studies. High-quality design, materials, built form, and public realm elements should complement the adjacent historic commercial area.
Thanks, Tanisha. So within this Hamilton Dundas character area, the idea of a gradient of heights and densities will really help to achieve a goal of buffering and transitioning between low-rise single detached homes and more intensive types of development. So this will be achieved by encouraging a range of building types and forms, from semi-detached and duplexes to townhouses, stacked townhouses, as well as mixed-use commercial and residential mid-rise buildings. The way that this gradient applies within the community node, this is a section cutting from east to west with Hamilton Street kind of in the middle there. This is really showing how the heights and densities will help to achieve the intensity and height decreasing on both sides of Hamilton Street. So that decrease happens toward the existing neighborhoods, and a number of new public streets within the larger commercial lots will help with that transition, and I'll describe that in a bit more detail as well. This is an example lot development plan which shows hypothetically one way that a large commercial lot, like in this case the Sobeys lot, that fronts both Hamilton and Dundas Street, could redevelop over time into a mixed-use residential and commercial site. So applying the principles of the guidelines, you can see that in this plan, certain principles like all buildings being oriented towards the street to frame the street edge. Ground floors of residential buildings are actually ground-oriented units with their own entrances and presence on the street. The parking areas are located at the interiors of the lot and not along the main street frontages. New streets create a regular grid network with very walkable sized blocks that don't exist right now. New green spaces are introduced as part of new development that are publicly accessible. Direct access to parks like Rockcliffe Gardens Park is emphasized and provided from those larger developments. Transit stops are integrated into the street design on both Hamilton Street and Dundas. And access to the parking areas is actually going to be in the future from those interior streets to not cause conflicts along Hamilton or Dundas Street. All of the red X's here you see are curb cuts that could be eliminated by providing additional access into parking areas from secondary streets. And then, as Melanie mentioned, a new pedestrian crossing across Hamilton Street. And then finally, trees being planted on all street frontages in the rear yards, parking areas, and open spaces to really achieve that level of tree canopy cover that we see in the established neighborhoods, but do not see in some of the commercial areas within the node right now. So we all know that the large setbacks along Hamilton Street right now, the frequent driveways and curb cuts and the lack of bike lanes make the street fairly pedestrian unfriendly and difficult and unsafe for cyclists. So we see in the future, by reconfiguring Hamilton Street, we can really ensure that there are plenty of not only large and wide sidewalks, but safe crossings, convenient transit stops, and cycling is separated and safe enough that your kids can bike all the way up to the park and back without worrying about conflicts with traffic. So this section here shows you an example of how we can reconfigure the existing right-of-way of Hamilton Street to achieve all of those objectives. Now, switching gears here to the historic commercial character area. We see that this area is centered on Dundas Street, east of Hamilton, all the way to Grindstone Creek. And the character here is different. There are really a rhythm of small scale lots and a small scale commercial village character. Now, we want to really think about creating low-rise building forms here that continue to define the street edge and also to really enhance the public realm and the streetscape. We want to think about integrating new development sensitively into this existing context. And as Melanie mentioned, that means heights between 2 and 3 stories and continuing that rhythm of regular narrow commercial frontages to enable that kind of interest as you're walking down the street of retail spaces and restaurants and things. And then finally, ensuring that new development integrates new connections between urban spaces. So thinking about those open spaces between the streets and the parks and Grindstone Creek and how those can all be woven together into a really positive public realm. So like the previous example, this again is an example lot development plan, which it shows some hypothetical future development scenarios within that commercial character area. Now, the intent here is to really fill in what we would call the missing teeth with thoughtfully designed buildings, as well as new public spaces, all of which can reinforce that character, the heritage character, and to make it an even better place that we already love to shop, grab ice cream or coffee, and really enjoy being in downtown Waterdown. Now, many of the principles we saw in the Hamilton Dundas character area also apply here. Some of these include the street orientations of buildings addressing and being located near the street edge, parking located at the lot interiors and not along the main streets, creating public green space, but also public plaza space and hardscape areas that are great for gathering and spending time, in addition to actual green softscaped areas. And then also re-engineering Franklin Street as a pedestrian-focused shared street. So this would allow vehicles at certain times for deliveries, but also have the ability to be closed down to be entirely pedestrianized for certain events, for market days or certain special events. Now, designating Barton Street as an east-west route will enable us to remove cyclists from Dundas Street where it could be dangerous. So creating that as the designated biking route to get all the way from east-west towards Grindstone Creek. In terms of heritage, really thinking about it appropriately transitioning to heritage properties and buildings to ensure that those heritage properties are maintained as a prominent address in the streetscape and making sure that any new development doesn't infringe on the prominence of those heritage buildings. And then finally, similar to the Hamilton Dundas area, really creating a lot of street plantings on all street frontages, in yards, parking areas, as well as open spaces to once again green up and increase that tree canopy cover in the area.
Nathan, before you leave that slide, there was a question about what does the red boundary signify?
Certainly, yes.
Maybe just
So the red lines are simply looking at the property lines that exist right now. So there are kind of faint red lines that you see behind. Those are all of the property lines. The really thick ones are these example lots that might be one consolidated lot that could be redeveloped with additional buildings in them.
Great, thank you.
So looking at Dundas Street, the buildings in this commercial area, both the historic buildings and recent development really have a positive relationship with the street. And that interface between the streetscape and the building frontage is really great. And we want to build on that in our future vision for the area. So in our conceptual vision, we really see an enhancement of the streetscape that starts to provide very generous wide sidewalks and safe street crossings. We see new tree plantings, attractive sidewalk paving, benches, furnishings, and lighting. And then also, once again, low scale buildings up to 3 stories in height that start to fill in gaps along the street edge to really start creating that consistent edge of really interesting uses. So more retail, restaurants, cafes, and other businesses along those ground floors that will spill out into the public realm to really make an exciting and interesting pedestrian experience all year round. So the intent here is that this new enhanced streetscape and the pedestrian-friendly scale and character will continue not only from downtown Waterdown, but also along Dundas Street up through Hamilton Street to really create a sense of unity in terms of the look and the feel of those streets and the feeling that the node of Waterdown is one place and to tie that all together.
The urban design guidelines provide, thanks Nathan. The urban design guidelines provide high-level guidance to development within the low-rise neighborhoods, which are located immediately adjacent to the community node, which are the areas in yellow on the screen. The general character of these neighborhoods are low-rise in scale, with development typically of 2.5 stories or less. The guidelines recognize that some incremental change could occur in the neighborhoods over time, but encourage compatibility of fit within the neighborhoods to reflect existing design character. So we recognize that the neighborhoods will remain stable, but not static. Additions, renovations, and rebuilds on residential properties may occur over time. However, the large institutional sites have the greater potential for intensification. It's important to note that the scale, form, and height of development within the neighborhoods should complement the neighborhood's prevailing design character, and that any future development should not erode existing character or function of the neighborhoods. It is our hope that the urban design guidelines for the Waterdown community node will help to build on the established strong character of Waterdown and to accommodate growth and development in a responsible and sustainable way. We thank you for listening to our presentation, and I'll pass that back to Sue. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Tanisha. And thank you, everyone, for I know we've got one more short presentation to go, and then we'll be able to continue with our discussion. So I'd like to now call upon Christina Martins, and I know Rebecca is here as well to assist with the presentation on the Cultural Heritage Review. So over to you, Christina.
Thank you very much, Sue. Let me just get the presentation up on the screen. There we go. Good evening. As Sue said, my name is Christina Martins, and I am a Cultural Heritage Specialist with Archaeological Services, Inc., also known as ASI. And Rebecca Shera is the Cultural Heritage Division Director and Senior Project Manager for this Cultural Heritage Review. This evening, I want to present to you the objectives of the Cultural Heritage Review and also provide an overview of the significant cultural heritage landscapes that have been identified in the village of Waterdown, as well as present the recommendations for the built heritage resources and cultural heritage landscapes that have been identified in the secondary plan area. And the recommendations is the piece that we would like your feedback on. Our process has been to assess, evaluate, and make recommendations. So we've been assessing new cultural heritage landscapes within Waterdown, reviewing previously identified cultural heritage landscapes, and then evaluating those against the Ontario Heritage Act, Regulation 906, as well as the City of Hamilton Council adopted cultural heritage landscape evaluation criteria. We've currently provided our draft recommendations. Those recommendations have been provided to Melanie as part of her secondary plan drafting process, as well as to Brooke McElroy in developing the urban design guidelines. And as part of the process, the cultural heritage team has also reviewed those documents and provided feedback related to heritage conservation. Cultural heritage landscapes have been studied and defined in many heritage policies internationally, and for Ontario, the definition comes from the provincial policy statement and provides guidance on what constitutes a cultural heritage landscape. It's defined as a geographical area that may have been modified by human activity and is identified as having cultural heritage value or interest by a community, including an Indigenous community. So generally, it's understood that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts in many cases, and that it's the area or place that is of some interest as opposed to individual elements. 11 existing or potential cultural heritage landscapes were identified as part of the review, and they're shown on the map. As part of this review, it was determined that the village of Waterdown as a whole and the Mill Street Heritage Conservation District would not be further reviewed as the village boundaries extend beyond the secondary plan study area, and the Mill Street Heritage Conservation District is understood and appropriately protected under the Heritage Conservation District Plan policies. So of these, 9 areas were evaluated. 8 of those were previously identified, and 1 was identified by the community, and that's Sealy Park, and 6 of those met the criteria. So the 6 cultural heritage landscapes that are recommended to be recognized in the secondary plan are a cultural heritage landscape along Dundas Street, one the length of Main Street, Waterdown Memorial Park, Waterdown Heights Subdivision, Union Cemetery, and Sealy Park. Conservation policies and principles are set out in the provincial policy statement, and a baseline standard for good conservation is set out in the Ontario Heritage Toolkit. It's these tools that our conservation recommendations are based upon. The provincial policy statement encourages a sense of place by promoting well-designed built form and cultural planning, and by conserving features that help define character, including built heritage resources and cultural heritage landscapes, and that significant resources shall be conserved. The recommendations for built heritage resources are that they are protected through inclusion on the Heritage Register. These properties would then require cultural heritage impact assessment for Planning Act applications. And we have recommended that the built heritage resource conservation measures be aligned with cultural heritage landscape conservation measures. It was the Built Heritage Inventory which identified these properties. And as Melanie noted, these are draft recommendations that we're showing tonight. For the cultural heritage landscapes, there are a suite of tools that could be used to protect these areas. For individual properties, that could mean designation under the Ontario Heritage Act as under Part 4. For groups of properties, that would be Heritage Conservation District designation under the Ontario Heritage Act or Part 5. Cultural heritage landscape identification in the secondary plan. Identification of heritage roads and special character roads in the secondary plan. Area-specific policy areas, urban design guidelines, protected views and view corridors, and zoning bylaws. So for each cultural landscape, there's been slightly different approaches taken based on the cultural heritage values and attributes of those areas. So the first 3 that we're going to look at are Dundas Street, Main Street, and Waterdown Heights. And these cultural heritage landscapes all include multiple properties within neighborhoods or along roadways. So the tools that we're recommending are to primarily protect these through identification in the secondary plan and building policies around that related to heritage roads and special character roads in the case of Dundas Street and Main Street, having area-specific policy areas, as well as the urban design guidelines that Brooke McElroy presented. We've also recommended protected views and view corridors. So along Dundas Street, that's across the Grindstone Creek. And along Main Street, the view of the water tower has been identified as a heritage attribute and will be protected through secondary plan policies. For the individual properties, so that's Waterdown Union Cemetery, Sealy Park, and Waterdown Memorial Park, we're recommending identification in the secondary plan as well for these and the policies that would complement that. We are also recommending Part 4 designation for Sealy Park and Waterdown Memorial Park to protect the identified heritage attributes. And there's an consideration for protection under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act for Waterdown Union Cemetery, but that's still under consideration at this time as there is the Cemeteries Act in place, and it being an active cemetery, there's greater complexities with a Part 4 designation related to the ongoing internment rights of families. Additional recommendations have been made for the protection of cultural heritage landscapes. One of these is a legislative strategy, so using a private tree bylaw that would focus on trees that have been identified as being important to the cultural heritage landscapes for Dundas Street, Main Street, and Waterdown Heights subdivision. And the private tree bylaw would assist in the conservation of that character. Non-regulatory strategies that help protect heritage have also been recommended, the development of an interpretation and commemoration strategy, and developing marketing and promotion strategies such as walking tours and local tourism. The more that people know and understand the history of the community and the places, the more likely that those places will be conserved and protected. So that's how those recommendations would assist in conservation. We've also recommended some future work be carried out to protect the heritage character in Waterdown. One of these pieces is the Grindstone Creek Valley, and that it should be researched and evaluated as a cultural heritage landscape for its significance as a natural landscape, as well as being the site of numerous milling industries and the Canadian Pacific Rail line. And this work is recommended to be completed as part of the citywide cultural heritage landscape inventory. A second recommendation that we've made for future work is looking at the historical village of Waterdown as a whole. So as I said before, the historical village extends outside of the areas of the secondary plan, and so wasn't reviewed as part of this study. But we're recommending that it be researched and evaluated as a cultural heritage landscape and potentially initiate a Heritage Conservation District study to assist in understanding the historical village as a whole and as a way of relating the distinct cultural heritage landscapes to each other and to the many other built heritage resources within the village. We looked at additional tools to consider how the whole of the village could be protected. We considered a tool called site plan control, and it's an application process that's used to review the design of new development. Low density housing, such as single detached or semi-detached houses, are usually exempt from site plan control. But it was determined that a Heritage Conservation District study would be the best approach at this point to implement the heritage conservation goals for the area. Heritage conservation districts have a history of being a good tool for residential landscapes, and community support has been expressed for additional heritage conservation district area in Waterdown. If following a study, if a plan is put in place, a heritage conservation district plan would include a permit process supported by objectives, policies, and guidelines, and it would then provide a transparent process for the community. As well, the study and plan process provides its own consultation and engagement with the community. So we're recommending that this would be an additional area that would encompass the cultural heritage landscapes that have been recommended and would be additional and separate from the existing Mill Street Heritage Conservation District that is currently in place. That brings us to the close of my presentation, and I will turn it back to Sue.